Okay, welcome everybody to a special edition of 1 Hour Rebellion where I am going to teach you, the viewer, how I teach this game at conventions to new players. So new players I let play the rebels. Most people think they're playing the good guys. They're actually playing the bad guys, but we'll get into that later. Okay, a few certain things about setup. One, I take a couple of objectives out of the deck, but I still shuffle them like normal. I take time for peace, defend the people, and defensive position out of the deck. I also start the rebel player with Heart of the Empire and Death Star plans on turn one. Okay. Turn one, right away. So Empire knows that both of these are in play right away. I also take the other Death Star plans out of the system. Usually I take the, yeah, whatever. And then I played like normal. So there's 5 level 2s, 5 level 3s, but the Death Star plans Heart of the Empire, and then a random level 1s distributed. Rebel players start with Saw out, but they don't take a penalty for rep. They also start with R2D2 and C3PO. This makes things easy, and I explain to them that these droids that are attached to Leia and Mon Mothma are to help them complete and block objectives. And then I just leave it at that. The Imperial player always starts with Mahdi, although they don't have to use them, but I always deploy them. Typically, I'll put them on Coruscant. And they also have Tarkin's card. I toss the rest of them. This is to help play catch up because the loyalty is always Rhodia, Mandalore, Mygeeto, subjugated on Corellia and Celeste. You could flip these two around, I suppose, if you wanted to. The idea is I don't have any gimme spaceships. You're not allowed to deploy on Rhodia. And then I always give the rebels what's, in my opinion, three of the best systems. So I'll give them Moncal, Bothui, and usually Ryloth as their starting rebel system. So that way there's nothing I can immediately subjugate, and they're going to get some fun stuff on the queue. It's not fun as rebels to play your first game and just loot stuff. Okay, then what I do is I explain the starting cards, and here's how I say it. Sabotage blocks production. Build Alliance increases your own production. Infiltrate helps you score points by shuffling through the subjective deck. And this objective token and this time marker, when they touch each other, the rebels win. Most games end around 8 or 9 or 10, give or take. So they need to score a handful of objectives. And then Rapid Mobilize is for returning troops to your hidden base, or to sneak a look at probe cards or the Empire, so you've no information that the Empire knows and doesn't know. Then I tell the rebels to go ahead and place one of their leaders here on every mission. I explain fists, diplomacy, intel, and tactics and how that works. And I say, great, go ahead and put one on every mission, and you don't have to tell me which one's which. So typically they'll put Saw on those. Sometimes they'll do this, and I'll say, great, keep Leia back to block. Okay, block or move or attack. So this is kind of their they get to choose here. Like they could put Saw and Riken back and forth, that's fine. But they get to pick, these are face down. Then I explain the Imperial cards, what capture does and why an Imperial player might want to do it. What the purpose of gather intel is to dig through the probe cards, sort of like an Imperial infiltrate. R&D will fix a sabotage. So if he sabotages a loyal planet, it will solve that sabotage, but it does not solve a subjugated sabotage. And Rule by Fear is like my Build Alliance, except instead of playing it anywhere, I have to play it on a subjugated space. Then I don't tell them what I'm picking. And generally, I will always pick at least one mission and then put somebody on it. So if I pick Rule by Fear, I might put Palpatine on it, or Vader, or somebody, and just see how that goes. I never pick a non-starting mission on turn one. Sometimes I'll pick R&D. It doesn't matter. But I always pick at least one after I explain the starting missions. And then I say the rest of the cards in this deck are different versions of these starting cards, is basically what they do, in addition to having a counter for capture, which is a rescue. And then I just sort of start. I say, so what we're going to do is we're going to take turns passing, right? So I'm not going to explain all the rules to everybody here. That'll be a different game, but I explain some of the concepts. So the key idea here is I want the rebels to think to themselves. I say, okay, play a mission. So let's just say they play it in order here. And then I say, great, you're going to sabotage. So the very first thing you want to do when you sabotage is think about, am I playing research and develop? And you know I'm not, because research and develop's a tactic card, and the Emperor doesn't have a tactics value. So for that reason, you're safe sabotaging something important. But maybe you want to sabotage something that I don't rule by fear later to get a better build. So I kind of explain the concept of, what the goal is, and then let them pick. I don't tell them what to do. I'll say, great, sabotage Magneto, or maybe sabotage Corellia. If they were doing something like trying to sabotage Rhodia, I'd probably talk them out of that. But otherwise, I just let them be. Okay, then I'll typically make a move. Then I'll let them do their next mission. So with Build Alliance, I usually emphasize the idea behind Utapau. And this is why Mothma has C3PO on him, to discourage the Imperial from blocking. And then here I'll say, find the most valuable space on the board, in your opinion. And then I let them look at the board and explain to them that Utapau is the single biggest one here. Because I'm not playing a killer card, I can't easily destroy that, so typically this will just go through. When they get to infiltrate, I make them infiltrate somewhere, and I remind them about capture, which is kind of a counter to infiltrate. So if I do have Vader on a mission, I'll suggest they infiltrate somewhere where they already have defense, for example. And then I'll encourage them to infiltrate and say why that's so important, right? So then they'll get their first experience infiltrating. And lastly, when R&D comes up, I make them R&D. Why? Or not R&D, rapid mode. Why? Because most Rebel players will never play this card otherwise. Here's the cool thing. When they rapid, they will then at the end of the turn, so then, let's say I play the Emperor and we try to rule by fear, then I explain about Leia blocking and whether or not she might want to block or maybe move troops instead. 9 times out of 10 she'll block. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Maybe she uses R2, maybe she doesn't. But then here's the fun thing. At the end, Rapid is now forced to be used, and they have a choice. They can either return these guys to the base and risk an intel, or if they move them or they don't want to, I say, great, you can look at the cards on the deck here, and you can now know which of these systems I don't know about. And that's important because you might escape here at the end of the game, or you can bluff and say, okay, I know you didn't know about Yavin, so I'm going to try to pretend that the base is in Yavin. So usually forcing them to do one of each of these missions will help, because you'll pretty quickly see that everything else is related to those missions, right? We talked about capture being the counter to infiltrate. Well, rescues are the counter to capture. Covert options, similar to infiltrate. Sabotaging and blowing things up out of the queue are similar. There are some unique missions here that aren't quite right, but other things are, they're all similar themed, and if you explain it that way, it will start to make sense to the rebels, where you don't have to over explain everything. Similarly, when Imperials start playing missions, obviously their missions are versions of the base card. So if I play Rule by Fear turn 1, I will typically try a capture on turn 2, maybe a capture and an R&D. I try to play at least 2 to 3 missions a turn, just to put the pressure, take the movement pressure off and give the rebels a couple decent turns of builds. If I feel like I have a huge advantage, my other rule is I need to laser the base. meaning I need to keep this Death Star alive, knowing that they have Death Star plans that they're starting with. And also, it'll force me to R&D to build a second Death Star, which I always think is sort of fun. And the R&D forces me to pull things like lasers out and maybe some less other, opportune things. And everybody always shrieks for joy when the second Death Star comes out and the base is in Ryloth, which is oftentimes where it is here. So it's a good time to play. So again, force the rebels to play each one of their base missions on turn one, and then as they play, explain some of the thought process, but let them make their pick. Give them the opportunity to take the core and take the Death Star right away and score points for it. Take the trashy objectives out of the deck. Give them Saw. And then you can play Mahdi, which both limits your first action turn, but also gives you the option to play some more cards so you can show the rebel player the deck. Let them put their base anywhere they want. And by default, I usually encourage them. I mean, you can let them pick where to start their units. If they're confused, I always set their starting unit up to be Corvette, transport, a couple troops, and a Y-Wing and Bathory. This gives them the option to move them back into the base with Rapid if they want, and helps illustrate why they might want to do that. Having Rhodia here makes this an interesting target where maybe they're like, well, I have cut supply lines, so I'm going to go ahead and do this too. And keeping this loyal helps keep that in place. So you're giving the rebels a lot to think about, and you're giving them fun things to do up front. Then if you're lucky, maybe you get a Star Destroyer, probably not. The rebels are probably getting 2 Mon Cals on turn 1. I mean, almost definitely getting 2 Mon Cals on turn 1, but not getting a third because you're not letting them play their special objectives right away. You can catch up with R&D, and then by forcing yourself to laser the base, you might be more likely to gather intel, which will just make for maybe a little more unique game with some more interactions. I find when I teach the game this way, everybody tends to have a blast. And it's a good way to handicap a Imperial player. A lot of the times I feel like new players get given the Empire because they're easier to move around. But I find that new players don't like the experience of, oh, I'm getting killed by these objectives that I don't even know what they are. Like, great, I just lost and I'm not sure why, even though I have all this stuff. Whereas if you're rebels in this setup, you're going to get stuff. You're going to get to do cool objectives, and you're going to get to use a lot of leaders. And Saw plus R2 plus C3PO help make up for some mistakes. And then there's no got you cards with the Empire. And then because you're starting with such a disadvantage, you're not going to feel super bad if you play, some of your killer cards later, like, address delays or display of power or anything like that, because you're really starting at such a disadvantage that catch up is good. And it also makes things like, secret weapons research more meaningful to play if you're digging for that other Death Star. So that's what I got. Anyway, hope that was some good advice, and hope that you like it. Everything else I play largely the same. I let them pick their leaders. I do play with action cards. I don't take any missions out of the deck, really. And then, you'll have to explain a little bit when combat comes around. I guess we can talk about combat real quick. When I do combat in this scenario, I follow all the normal rules, but I do help them a little bit in the sense of suggesting what combat card they could play. I never tell them what combat card to play, but I might suggest what they do and why they might do it in terms of, what's optimum and what's not. The nice part about the rebels is because there are fewer combats that they're initiating, typically you just need to let them know, play something that matches the unit that you have in the system, as long as you have it. If you don't, play one that sounds weaker. And if, for example, they play the Nebulon B card because they think it's not very good, I will just tell them to take it back and play Ion Cannon instead. and I'll explain to them why later on when there's a good opportunity to play the Nebulon card. I don't take the time to over-explain each one of these cards and the nuances. I also talk about uh, lightsabers as a repair symbol. That's a lot easier of a concept because if I'm attacking here and I roll some hits, I'll say, great, I do one crit and one regular, so that's one regular on here and one crit. And I have a repair, but because I don't have any damage, I don't have anything to repair. Then if he does hits later, then I can say, also, my turn has already passed, so I can't repair this anymore. I've already had my opportunity. And that's why going second is better than going first. And then that's usually it. But I teach a lot of those lessons as we go. Just remember, it's not fun to get totally smooshed, but it's also not fun to feel like the Imperial players just letting you have it for no reason either. So this gives them a lot of choices to pick for the base that are reasonable. They're probably not going to pick Demon Tuning with the Death Star there, but you never know. I've had it happen before. And I will just leave it at that. So hopefully this video was fun and it gave you a different way of thinking about it rather than just starting with learn to play and going from there. So happy hunting, and let's get some more Rebels into this game. Thanks, guys.